How's it going, everyone? Cody Carbone here, CEO of the Digital Chamber. An awesome conversation today that I am honored to moderate. Two gentlemen up here with me that I don't think need any introduction. Nathan McCauley, co-founder and CEO of Anchorage Digital. Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. Really cool conversation for you today. These two gentlemen have been spending a lot of time in my hometown, Washington, D.C. I don't think anyone needs an introduction to Anchorage or to Chainlink, but I think what people are interested in is, why are these two founders spending so much time now in the nation's capital? I think where we have to start, March 7th, the crypto summit at the White House. Both of you were there. Give us the inside scoop. How was your trip to the crypto summit at the White House? Did you see or hear anything that surprised you? Maybe we start with you, Nathan, and go to Sergey.
Sure. So I think it was just an incredible opportunity to get to visit the White House. At least for me, it was the first time I'd been there. I don't know about you, Sergey, but it was really a culmination of one of the things that I think President Trump promised during the campaign was to really listen to the industry, to invite us in, to establish kind of an open dialogue with the industry about what's going on. And from the first or second day executive orders that he passed leading up right there to that summit, it's been the beginning and kind of the middle in a sense of, I would say, incredible engagement with the digital asset industry. That's just been so refreshing. And it was just really an honor to be there. And I really appreciated it.
Yeah, it was great. At the end of the day, the two things that surprised me, firstly, was the seniority of the people there. So the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, Hester Peirce, the Commissioner of the SEC, Caroline Pham from the CFTC, senators, congressmen, all these extremely senior people. And that's not something you see in countries where the blockchain adoption rate is very high. And to see that level of commitment and interest for such senior people in the government was, frankly, very, very positive and motivating about my own views and ideas of how Washington, D.C. is going to progress with these problems. The second one that I found very interesting was the concept that our industry was unfairly persecuted, which I generally agree with. And there was this whole conversation before, during, and after the public part of the session, where there was a tendency to view our industry as being artificially depressed in the United States. And the word lawfare was used a lot of times from the people in the administration and by a few others. But generally speaking, I think that there has been a period of kind of unfair singling out of our industry because of one or two negative events, of one or two bad actors, or the loss of consumers' money in a few individual cases like FTX or a few others. And I think that it made very clear to me that time is like well behind us, right? So you have all these senior folks, and you have a clear understanding that, whatever happened is in the past, and that it kind of needs to be right-sided towards an acceleration of our industry rather than a deceleration of it. All of which I found extremely positive.
Yeah, I missed the part about what was surprising, so I just want to add on a little bit there. I think there were two comments that came out that I thought were particularly inspiring there in person. One of them was the little bit of commenting on the Bitcoin strategic reserve and David Sachs's framing on the Bitcoin as being particularly special, and he actually used the comment that Bitcoin was created via the Immaculate Conception, which the analogy there is not lost on anyone. What he's saying there is something quite profound. And then Secretary Bessent coming in and saying, "Hey, we're going to advance the cause of the U.S. dollar, and we're going to do that via stablecoins." I think a lot of us in the industry have been arguing that kind of a notion for many years. And so to see the full embrace that stablecoins are a chance to increase the dominance of the dollar across the globe was incredibly exciting and frankly, surprising to see that much of an embrace from not just President Trump himself, but from the cabinet members.
And I'm sure it was validating for you two founders who have been pushing for clarity for so long in the United States, this moment to gather at the White House with, as you said, Sergey, the top leaders, the most senior leaders of our government, this culmination of that, the United States government is finally prioritizing that. That wasn't the first time you both have been to DC. I follow both of you on social media, as I'm sure many in the audience do. We've seen you guys in DC many times throughout the year. What are each of you trying to achieve in DC through your time spending there? Maybe we'll start with Sergey and then go to Nathan.
Sure. So we have three large overall objectives. One objective relates to the decentralized finance community. Chainlink powers the majority of decentralized finance and became adopted as a technology initially by the DeFi community. So coming up with clear ideas about how the US should approach decentralized finance is something that we're very interested in and something we want to do to help support the DeFi community in general, because we feel very strongly that the DeFi community is a very important part of the blockchain community overall, and that it's also in many ways the future of the global financial system. So one way is, how do you make sure that DeFi is approached correctly by the US government, which is very significant globally because the US government is what's known as a super regulator and their decisions ripple out globally. The second thing is about the institutional side of our industry. Chainlink also powers many of the top institutions today. So we power folks like Fidelity International on production. Here at this conference, we announced our transaction with JP Morgan and others. And so there are bills like market structure that are there in DC now. And they cover a lot of the distinction, or try to cover the distinction between cryptocurrency versus some other types of asset, who covers it, the SEC versus the CFTC, and various other topics. But we think there needs to be more clarity to make institutions comfortable with issuing high quality tokenized and digital assets. And so that's another really, really big goal we have. This extends all the way from the Treasury and OCC and their interpretive guidance letters, all the way to Congress and the regulators like the SEC and CFTC. And then the third goal for us is to enable the US Congress and regulators to understand what good technical standards look like for key blockchain related events like proof of reserves, proof of liabilities, and proof of solvency, right? And proof of composition. So basically, how do you prove things about assets on chain? How do you create reliable standards for cross-chain communication? How do you create automated compliance through on-chain smart contract automation of compliance? So the third one that relates, I would say, the most directly and the most heavily to Chainlink's work is educating the regulators, educating the Congress, and educating the executive branch and everybody about what high-quality technical standards for the U.S. financial system look like for proof of reserves, cross-chain interoperability, automation of compliance through blockchains, those types of topics. So those are our three large overarching goals.
Yeah, like you said, this hasn't been certainly hasn't been my first time in DC. One of the early things that's kind of interesting about Anchorage is probably our third or fourth demo of our technology that we ever showed to anyone in the world was to the SEC. This is back in probably Q1 of 2018. We took our technology to them and showed, hey, like, we think we can be a qualified custodian for digital assets. We think this is the way of the future, and we actively want to seek regulation. We would like to be under the careful eye of a regulator, and that's been something that we've done since the very beginning. And so the overall engagement with Washington has always been about we can bring regulatory clarity, we can bring thoughtful regulation to the digital asset space. And so what our current engagement there between, I testified a couple of times, I testified both at the House Financial Services Committee and Senate Banking, is that this can be done well, and we think there's an incredible opportunity to do that. We will continue to engage there. This has been kind of something that's always been at the forefront of our minds, and something that we thought was necessary in order to secure institutional adoption in the digital asset ecosystem. And so whether we're engaging on market structure bills, thinking about what is the right kind of separation of responsibilities across the various market participants, we're advocating for some of those things now. On stablecoins, how do we make sure that the stablecoins can come out in a way that they're regulated, thoughtful, safe for individual consumers, and able to expand the dominance of the dollar. And so that's really what we're focused on now, particularly is helping out with those two bills. And then also other areas we're interested in is continued engagement with our primary regulator, the OCC, thinking about like what comes next in terms of banking, thinking about how do we get to the point where we're not the only digital asset bank in the country, but there are dozens or not, if not hundreds of digital asset banks that are able to participate in the industry. That's where really where we want to see this go. And we're kind of advocating for that as much as we can while in Washington.
I want this conversation to be forward-looking. There has been a lot of optimism coming out of DC. There's been great progress from the White House and from Congress, but for Nathan, specifically for Anchorage, it hasn't been all roses. There was a report in Barron's last month about a DHS probe into the company's practice and policies. And I know this may be sensitive, and I hate to put you on the spot, but is there any light you can shed about the probe and where it currently stands?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm happy to address that. Look, this article came out. We didn't comment on it. I felt it was irresponsible because it was so speculative in nature, and so we kind of stayed out of participation in that article. But of course, looked at it and took it seriously. Had our lawyers look into it, checked in, uncovered every stone, and there is no investigation into us that is unambiguously clear at this point. And so, frankly, I'd say that article is what some might call bullshit, and so I'm happy to clear the air on that. And for me, the thing that's most kind of makes me most sad about things like that is that it makes me worried that other people won't decide to follow our path. You kind of make your identity about being regulated, about being thoughtful, about following every possible rule, about following rules that don't even exist yet because they're just the right way to do that. And so my sincere hope is that no one would be discouraged from actually pursuing regulatory clarity in the way that we have, because we think it's the right path.
Well, that's fantastic news, and I appreciate you being willing to share that. So speaking of where some may find a lot of bullshit, let's talk about Congress. We talked.
You're gonna get us in trouble.
I got to deal with them on that basis. We've talked about stablecoin legislation. We've talked about market structure legislation. For you two gentlemen who are spending a lot of time in DC, what do you think's going to happen in Congress this year?
Ooh, I feel better predicting the price of Bitcoin. That's a tricky one. Look, I think the highest level thing, I remain a default optimistic person. So I'll caveat this, that I actually do think both of the bills are going to pass. Both the stablecoin legislation, whether it's the stable or genius or kind of whatever happens in reconciliation, I do think that's going to pass because there is bipartisan understanding that this is critically important for the U.S.'s standing in the global economy. The opportunity presented by stablecoins is profound, and it's very clear that there is bipartisan understanding of that and bipartisan support from that. And the good news with the stablecoin legislation specifically is that's, relatively speaking, quite simple. It's a very specific question. How do you create stablecoins, have them properly reserved, who oversees that, and what does that industry look like? That's a relatively straightforward one to understand, and I think there's a lot of bipartisan support there. I think there's going to be a lot of work to do on market structure. There's a lot of questions. Should the market structure of crypto mirror traditional market structure, or should we have more integrated offerings? I think there's a lot of questions on either side. What are the conflict of interests kinds of things that ought to be considered. There's been a lot of difficult things that have happened in financial markets over time, where safety and soundness of the entire system has been preserved because of that separation of concerns. Custodians having their role, brokers having their role, exchanges having their role. And so I think a lot of the question there is going to come on what is that designation of different responsibilities. So that's one area that needs to be debated and kind of thought through on a bipartisan level. The second one is how do we categorize assets? What actually is a security? What actually is a commodity? What is a stable coin? Who is going to have legislative and kind of oversight responsibility over those? So I think market structure will pass, but it's certainly the bigger bear to be defeated. From our point of view, actually, it's kind of funny because we're more interested in stablecoin bill passing, because that's one where particularly for Anchorage regulatory clarity is helpful. Because we're already a national bank, market structure doesn't affect us that much because national banks are allowed to hold securities, commodities, currencies. And so we have like actually a good amount of regulatory clarity on that. But I think for many industry participants, the market structure one will be where a lot of the future of the industry kind of gets debated and fleshed out.
Sergey, what about you? What do you think is going to happen this year in the legislative debate?
I think that stable coins, the stable bills will pass. I think that's in a good place, and there's more agreement there. And there were some last-minute hiccups recently, but I think it's probably going to get largely resolved and pass, and hopefully relatively soon, before the August recess. Market structure, I think, is a much more expansive bill that will affect both the crypto industry and the traditional banking industry as it moves into the Web3 way of doing things. I mean, I think it's absolutely critical. And on the one hand, I want to expand the scope of what it does to make the institutional participants more comfortable with doing more. But on the other hand, I'm kind of worried about expanding the scope in that there's still a number of unsettled things that need to be resolved. I think the time to pass something like that is definitely now. While there's all this positivity across both houses, both the House and the Senate, and from the administration and from the regulators, like if there was ever a good time to pass a bill like this, it's basically now. So if you can't pass it now, I mean, there has to be some pretty big force at this point that changes the equation to make you pass it later. I mean, that force could be U.S. competitiveness. That force could be people in the government viewing some adversary of the U.S., choosing to do more blockchain stuff and then choosing to catch up to that. That could happen. But the conditions right now are still pretty close to ideal to pass something like that. I am not sure if that's going to pass this year because of how unfinished it is in some respects. And I hope that it does. So I think there's still a lot of different groups proposing a lot of different things. And the market structure bill also has the capacity to give some of those groups advantages if something is passed a certain way, right? So that's my worry about that. But I think at the end of the day, everyone still sees that there's like this window in time, and we need to take advantage of that window. So in terms of the positive or the the optimist side of it, I think at the end of the day, the industry will put aside whatever personal gain they might have and try to take advantage of this brief window. That's my recommendation to like everybody is just pass the thing. Your personal interests are kind of important to you, but don't mess with this window, right? Kind of keep this thing relatively tight and brief, unless there's something really critical, and let's just pass it while the window is there, is kind of my advice in my view.
Hear, hear. Well, maybe, we started the conversation talking about the White House. While Congress is debating this legislation, Nathan, you mentioned your primary regulator is the OCC and the prudential regulators. I imagine Sergey, you might be dealing more with the market regulators. What are you guys looking for from the regulators as Congress is debating legislation? What do you want to see from the agencies? We have Bo coming on next. What do you want to see from the White House Crypto Task Force?
Yeah, so I think there's a certain class of problems that can only be solved with legislation. And I think between stablecoins and market structure, there's been a good delineation of what can and should be solved at a within the legislative body, and in service of like debate and serving the American people. There's a huge amount of things that can be done just by the agencies themselves: internal rulemaking, interpretation, chartering of new entities, a whole mammoth set of things really that can be done within those particular agencies. You already see the SEC starting to work on this with I think they've had over 100 meetings come in to meet with the crypto task force inside the SEC. I think they've got the opportunity to do incredible amounts about clarifying what is and isn't a security over at the SEC. So just been really impressed with the engagement there. On the OCC side, and not just the OCC, but actually all of the prudential regulators across OCC, Fed, FDIC, they have taken a more open approach to say, hey, blockchain can be done and can be well. We've invested in understanding, this the OCC said they've invested in it for the last 4 years in overseeing us, and based on that understanding now they are ready to allow others to come in and get registered. And so I think you're seeing a generally lifting of the cloud across at least those 4 agencies, but I think that's going to happen to other places as well. CFTC will be also be doing that, and then personally, I'm pretty excited about things at the White House regarding the strategic Bitcoin reserve. I think that's it's a fascinating opportunity to look through, like, hey, what does it look like for the U.S. to at least hold the existing Bitcoin they have and not kind of lose out on the gains that are going to come over the next few years from the appreciation there. So that's another one that I'm tracking, and generally speaking, I've been super impressed with the White House's engagement. Bo Hines is fantastic. I know he's coming up next, and so I've just been really impressed there, and really looking forward to what comes next.
From my point of view, the Trump administration, Bo Hines, David Sachs are doing a fantastic job. I think we're all very lucky to have them in our industry's corner, advocating for it and working hard every day to make it something that'll bloom in the United States. From the regulators, I think through rulemaking, places like the SEC and the CFTC, you can have interpretive guidance that comes out relatively quickly on topics like transfer agency, various other key topics that would make it easier to build high-quality tokenized assets, digital assets, real-world assets in the U.S. financial system. And then from the OCC, there's a number of interpretive letters that limit banks in holding cryptocurrency, dealing with cryptocurrency, that if they were revised, you could have more institutional adoption of blockchain technology and more outputting of high-quality assets. So I think the White House, Bo and David and Trump administration are already doing massively great things for our industry, moving things forward in a very positive way. The regulators are very open and positive. Some interpretive guidance to clarify things for institutions would be very positive, and for our industry in general, reducing the risk of doing things on chain. And the OCC's interpretive letters getting revised, or some things there to make it clear that dealing with cryptocurrencies, how to account for cryptocurrencies, holding cryptocurrencies, all these things are safe and something that banks and regulated institutions can do. Those things happening quickly, even before market structure, stablecoins, I think, could have a pretty big and nearer term impact even than legislation. So those are the things I'd be looking at, or I am looking at and working on.
Unfortunately, 25 minutes goes very quickly, and we're out of time. Thank you both for your leadership in the industry. Thank you both for your leadership in DC. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Nathan and Sergey.